Greetings, sisters and brothers from all over the world. Welcome to Kumbukeni, your favorite open university. I am your co-host, Milton Alimadi, joined by my comrades. Sister, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hello, my name is Nduku, fellow co-host to Brother Alimadi and Brother Adisoji. I love the way you introduced it, open university. A place where we can learn and remember where we come from and counter the false narrative that has been perpetrated by the West against Africa. It's good to be with everyone today.
Asante sana, which of course is thank you very much in Kiswahili.
Karibu. Mm-hmm.
And then all the way from the belly of the beast, the mother of imperialism, from the United Kingdom, Brother Comrade Adesoji. Tell us a little more.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Again, from the United Kingdom, the heart of empire on which the sun never sets.
And never rises.
They wish, right?
Never rises.
Well, the name again is Adesoji Ginla. And again, welcome to another episode of Kumbukeni's podcast.
Yes. So, sisters and brothers, today we are tackling a very serious conversation. The roles of the World Bank and the IMF in continuing the practice of colonialism in Africa. So African countries won formal independence in the 1960s. And some of them, the leaders that emerged, were hoping that they could now decide and determine their destiny, correct? Mm-hmm. And enjoy sovereignty and determine what kind of production they want, economic production. But the World Bank and the IMF have emerged as the most essential institutions in perpetuating the dependency which prevailed during colonial rule. So that's the conversation we're going to have today. The World Bank and the IMF both wrapped up their spring meetings, their annual spring meetings this weekend in Washington, D.C. Normally I go every year. This year, because of obligations at John Jay College, where I teach, I could not make it. But many of my Ugandan compatriots went. I know sisters and brothers from other African countries went. Comrades from the United States also there to protest in front of the headquarters of the World Bank and the IMF. My Ugandan compatriots went to protest because these institutions have been subsidizing a tyrannical regime in Uganda of General Yoweri Museveni and his son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. We call them Papa Don and Baby Don, just like Haiti had back in the day.
With the Duvaliers, yeah.
Right. So they get $1 billion a year from the World Bank and the IMF. And add that with official aid that comes from the United States, another $1 billion. So you can see why this dictatorship has lasted for 37 years in Uganda, depriving people from determining their own destiny. Sister, I would like to start with you today, Sister Nduku. In your research of the World Bank, IMF, how is your attitude toward these institutions now and why?
So
give the ball rolling.
one of the resources I gave in the comments section is a YouTube video by Howard Nichols. He is an economist, an educator of economics. And he says at the beginning of this lecture not to look at them as evil entities, as we've always done. And he does have a good point in that we should look at them, at what they do as economic strategy. It's economic warfare. Yes, he's right not to look at them as evil, but I put a twist of my own, because intent is everything, right? I have a somewhat of a legal background. I never went to law school, but I majored in jurisprudence and paralegal studies, and I understand that intent is big when it comes to prosecuting and having people go to jail and determine whether they're guilty or not. So what is their intent? To drive policy, to implement policy that keeps Africa impoverished forever for the benefit of their development. Like, the two work hand in hand. And they do this knowing that millions of African lives will be lost, either through poverty, through hunger, through war, because those are the strategies they are using to keep Africa impoverished, or the consequences of them keeping Africa impoverished. So in knowing that and still putting these policies and continuing them, they are indeed evil entities.
And from a prosecutorial point of view, they deserve to be locked
They are
up,
guilty. We are charging them with the atrocities that they have put on Africa. We are charging them with keeping Africa underdeveloped. And we are coming for pay up.
Okay, exactly. Okay, all right. So we'll come to you back with some specific examples that you can share with us. But let's go to you, Brother Adesoji. The same question, based on your knowledge of the World Bank and IMF, based on your research and your conversations with other compatriots, what is your attitude toward these two institutions, and why?
I would like to go first to the mindset provided me by Che Guevara, who says you have to study your enemy. Because once you know your enemy's motivation, you know how to counter them. We first of all have to understand what brought those two institutions into our purview. So a bit research shows that following the onset of the Second World War, the moment the Second World War started, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill sat together on the White House lawn, and they were musing amongst themselves that, what do you think the cause of this Second World War is?
Right.
And so they both came to the agreement that it's simply economic, based on the fact that it was the Versailles Treaty that Germany kicked against was the reason why. Okay. So they came up with what was known then
and
as
for listeners not familiar, the oppressive reparations that they imposed upon defeated Germany after World War I.
After World War I. Yeah. So now, they after that, fireside chat, and so they came up with the idea of what is known as the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter effectively says, okay, once this war is over, we have to ensure that we create a machinery in place that ensures that we no longer fight ourselves. And if we look at it back on time, they've actually not fought themselves. So what did they create? They created, first and foremost, in 45, the United Nations. In 46, it was the World Bank. 47, it was IMF. 48.
Yes, comrade, I think we lost you for a second. You know how this technology works. And it could be coincidence, but then again, we're discussing the World Bank and IMF.
So can you hear me?
We can hear you. We missed 3 or 4 words.
Okay.
But you are talking about the fire chart. You're talking about the economic regime they wanted to structure.
Okay, yes. Okay. So
continue.
Okay, so they create out of that fire chart, they came up with the idea of what is known as the Atlantic Charter.
Correct.
So the Atlantic Charter will give birth to 5 organizations. First was the UN in 45. In 46, it was the World Bank. In 47, it was IMF. In 48, it was the General Agreement on Trades and Tariff, called the GAAP.
Right.
In
Comment, is that the one now replaced by the WTO?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
continue.
Okay. So just because you have all of that to focus your mind, they also gave you what was then known as the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. But if that still doesn't focus your mind, they added the cherry on the top called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO.
Okay.
So
I think people are getting the picture now.
I know, brother. You don't want to
so
drown them.
It's good.
in the-
It's good because I
the
like the way
clean
it
water.
built up.
Yeah.
It built up
So-
with these organizations that have apparently benevolent intent, and then he tops it with NATO, and everybody
Yes.
knows what NATO is all
Everybody
about.
can
But it's
understand.
good that he's telling us that all these were actually created at around the same time for the same purposes. I think that's a very good breakdown. Please continue.
Okay. So now, bearing in mind, all of these organizations were created in the 40s. No African country had gotten independence at that time, right? So
we know, obviously, it's not to benefit these countries. That's another good point.
Exactly. So what then transpired was just before the first country will get independence, which is Ghana in 57, you also then had the EEC, the Economic Community of European Economic Community.
Is Ghana
now
in 60 or
now called
57?
the EU now. Now called the EU, correct?
So now called the EU now.
Is Ghana 60 or 57?
No, 57.
57.
March
Okay.
57. March 57. So you now have all of these organizations coming into being, and they're already running and churning. And then you let the kids loose.
Right. Now you can have your so-called independence.
There
Because now
you go.
we know how to manage this independence.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's a good pre-layout, you know.
We should put a play together. I like that play. I would love to go to Broadway to see that play.
No, that's not something to joke about. I endorse that actually. Go ahead, brother.
So what then happened is the moment all of these countries were getting independence, if you go and read, and I read some of these independence speeches, the ones that got independence from France agreed to continue what it is the colonial masters have left. Looking back home in the Nigerian independence speech, the prime minister at the time, Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, said, as a new found nation, we would enjoin that we stick close to the tenets of what Britain practices.
So why did they want independence then?
It's a good question. But you got independence. But because you got independence, you've already been ensnared by all of these organizations, by deals that have been signed, both open and secret, to which you cannot extricate yourselves from.
Well,
and you were not a part of it.
You don't even want to. When you're saying, I want to continue, so brother, let me drop back to the sister again and come back to you.
Yeah.
Sister Ndoko. We now have the foundational layout the brother outlined. You already told us your attitude toward them. You used a very good example of the lecture by Professor Howard Nichols. Nichols. Now, give us some examples of how they use the mechanism to keep Africa impoverished and Africa to prevent Africa from industrializing. Because after all, that is how you create wealth and prosperity and skilled jobs. Go ahead, sister.
So before I do that, I'd like to say the one thing that I also wanted to say to our audience and anyone who ends up watching this is my advice to young people now who are looking to go into school: learn economics. Even if you take it as a minor, learn economics. No matter what you do, learn economics. And to those of us who are older and are done with school, but are still inquiring and want to do good for Africa, learn economics. It's an
Sister,
essential.
I want to thank you, because I tell that to all my students. And even when I teach history, I incorporate economics and political economy in it.
Yeah.
And when I do my history series, We Love African History, to different various organizations, I also do a primer on political economy. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And don't think of it as math and algebra. No, think of it as logic. What makes sense? What benefits one entity and what doesn't benefit the other entity? But if you do go to schools right now to learn it, just go with the understanding that the current system that is being taught is to benefit the West and Western development. So if you learn that, learn it knowing that, and knowing that you're going in to learn what they've done so that you can break that system in order to build a new system to empower Africa. So that's the goal. We're breaking the current system to build a new system to empower Africa and take it from a position of being impoverished constantly to build the West. So that's the goal. For those of us who are not in school, you have books. Just in this 1 week of doing research, we have the 3 videos from YouTube that provided a lot of rabbit holes that you can go down, and the books that we have in the chat that you can go down and find out more. Do your research. Yes. So conditional.
Without knowledge, you cannot even begin the journey toward liberation.
Yeah. You cannot call yourself a liberator, a radical, a revolutionary, unless you're learning economics. That is a decision I made this morning. I am not an expert. I am not the one with the answers for everyone, but I am saying, given what I encountered this week, we must, as revolutionaries, as activists, no matter what you're doing, economics is king. Economics has made all the decisions in the world where we are right now. So you must understand it. Conditional lending is one of them, one of the strategies that they use to answer your question, Brother Alimadi.
For example,
you can only get money if you do this. If you have neoliberal policies, privatization, which does not benefit Africa, you cannot do that because just like in America, where they have given power to private industry, you will be at the mercy of private industry, at the mercy of the few rich. And what the rich people's goal is to keep you poor so that they can continue being rich, so that they have you buying what they are selling and continue making money. So that's one of the reasons, and we'll get into it in the show. You have monopoly buying structures. That was the other one.
Explain that one. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, these people collude to make sure that they have you producing what they want in a set standard and with set prices, where they determine the price, despite the fact that you're the one producing. They determine the price, and you have no choice in the matter.
Right, and that's a very critical point that the sister makes. For example, when you go to I don't know where people shop, right? I know a lot of young people go to, is it called H&M?
H&M is one of them, yes.
Okay, so let's say young people go to H&M, and every dress was made the same color, the same cut. Every shirt made the same color, the same cut. Obviously, the price has to be the same, right?
Yep.
Because now there's no variation, right? So, as you said, Professor Nicholas explains that they force you even to produce the same type of bananas.
Yes.
So now there's no variation. Your price can't be altered. And then they impose the price that you sell it to them. And why? You have no choice, because there's only 4 or 5 of them who are involved in the purchasing. And they talk and they keep,
and they're colluding.
They collude, but they keep talking about, oh, free market enterprise, free market enterprise, free market enterprise. You know, the rhetoric is one thing, but the practice is something else. Maybe one more example, and then we jump back to the brother.
That reminded me quickly. That reminded me of an incident that happened in Kenya recently with KFC. KFC was found out by Kenyans that it was using potatoes from elsewhere and not from Kenya to make their French fries in Kenya, in their stores in Kenya, in Nairobi. And the Kenyans said, no, we're not having this. We're not buying your products. They were protesting. And KFC said, okay, we understand. In order for us to do business with you, your farmers are going to have to produce this particular potato that looks like this. Otherwise, we're not buying from you. Like, hell no. You're going to have our potatoes the way they are.
And probably GMO as well. But
exactly.
brother, before you say anything, I'm coming back to you now, brother. Before you say anything, just listen to this. Huh? They're saying, we won't buy KFC unless you use our potatoes.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, we won't buy KFC, period. We're going to
I know, right?
Organic Kenyan food.
Duku will open a restaurant. Come and buy some.
They want liberation halfway.
Comfortable liberation, as they would say.
Okay, brother, why don't you carry on from where the sister left?
Okay, so when the sister gave an example there in terms of monopoly buying, anyone remember the United Fruit Company?
Yes.
In South America.
Yes, Guatemala specifically. How they destroyed Arbenz government.
There you
Arbenz, who was democratically elected, he was in the mold over Thomas Sankara. Yes, he was a soldier, but he had a conscience. A soldier who, when he came to power, wanted to do exactly what Sankara did decades later, actually, or tried to. Land reform and all that. Oh, brother, you got me going with Arbenz. Now, what they did to Arbenz, I really still feel the pain up today. But continue.
Okay, so again, we're talking monopolistic buyers. Sister mentioned Kenya. There is a big monopoly there, Unilever, who still controls majority of the tea farms in there. So you cannot sell outside of that closed market. In fact, they're the only buyer. So who else are you going to sell tea to?
Hold on, brother. If Nduku wants to go to Kenya and buy tea from a farmer to come and sell in the US, I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Because
if you're buying 5 or 10 pounds, that's something. But if you're buying,
but if I'm having a regular production coming to
exactly. you have to buy through them. You have to buy through them. So again, it goes to speak to how the setup earlier I was talking about in terms of those organizations, your World Bank, your IMF, your general agreement on trades and tariff came into being. This is what they're set up. So because previously you had colonialism where they can do it themselves, they can basically tell you what to produce. I mean, there is no reason why there's no what's the word I'm looking for now? It's no the word escapes me.
Well, colonialism became politically incorrect.
Yes.
You couldn't have Europeans physically governing African countries.
Governing Africa.
European governors, European commanders of the army and the police, European administrators around the country. It was politically incorrect. It didn't look right. Obviously, now you have these sophisticated organizations that you just outlined.
And then they will tie the hands of, quote unquote, our leaders in agreements. If you try and get out of said agreements, you're sanctioned. Or worse still, you've got NATO sharing down, sharing down. Exactly. So this monopolistic buying comes to a head when people all of a sudden get frustrated and they lash out in ways they shouldn't really, which is an example, which is a laughable example with them insisting, although we want our potato, but we want to be poisoned, but we intend to be poisoned using our potato, as in the case of Kenya, insisting that someone who doesn't produce ethical foods continues to produce the same food, but use our own potato. Please kill us with our own potato. Can we?
Keep your oil.
So I mean, it's laughable. So again, I'll give you another example in terms of how do they go about this thing. Professor Nicholas, in his video there, highlighted the fact that they will come in and they will set the most extremes of measures. They know you will negotiate, but in fact, it is that negotiating piece, the middle bit, that they wanted from the first get-go. But because
Correct.
they've gone so far out, you've pulled them back in instead of saying no. I mean, I'll give an example of somebody who said no. Meles Zenawi, the
late Prime Minister of
the late
Ethiopia.
Prime Minister of Ethiopia, was one African leader who said no. And why did he say no? The sister said earlier that you need to study economics. This guy was as brilliant as they come. There was a gentleman who the World Bank sent to Addis Ababa to be their man on the scene. His name was Joe Stiglitz. And if everybody remember, Joe Stiglitz actually won the 2001 Nobel Prize for Economics.
Yeah, he's a professor of economics at Columbia.
Yes. Yeah, because he was the chief economist at the World Bank at that time. Now, question was, how did he get to win the Nobel Prize? He got to win it by listening to Zenawi. Because Zenawi told him, Zenawi said, okay, look at the guys who sent you here. How did they develop their own country? It was state-run development. It wasn't private money used in development. So why would you expect that thing to work here if
Correct.
it didn't work in Europe or the United States? He had to concede.
And he's telling this to a PhD economist.
So he had to concede. And it was part of his concession that Zenawi said, if you watch me, you would learn a lot. And he did. And
I think he did, because he actually ended up leaving the World Bank.
Yeah, leaving the World Bank.
And became somewhat critical
of the World Bank. Yeah. So Zenawi said, if you listen, watch, and learn. Where did we hear that before? Walter Rodney in The Groundings with My Brothers. He said, as an intellectual, sometimes when you sit with people who you think do not know, you actually learn much more than you initially went in there with. So that was just brilliant. And so
post that book, by the way, on the chat. People need to get that book.
Yeah, The Groundings with My Brothers.
Groundings with My Brothers, right. No, that's really brilliant. This whole notion that South Korea magically industrialized using
thank you.
private enterprise and all that is completely nonsensical, and it relates to what you just said. But sister, would you like to pick up on that? The myth that has been sold around the world that South Korea is because of neoliberalism, that it became industrialized, it became wealthy, all this nonsense. What was the truth?
In the interview, one of the videos we put in the chat at the beginning of Dr. Samir Amin by Dr. Is it Oaxaca? I forget his name.
The name of the show, right?
Yeah, but you'll see the link. Just look up at the beginning of the comments. He asks him that very question. What about South Korea? They developed. What about them? And he says, yes, South Korea developed, but it's not conventionally that they developed. It's not conventional economics. They were supported because the West, in specific, the United States of America, had a political agenda, a geopolitical agenda. They were worried that South Korea would embrace communism, which was happening at that time in that area. And
North Korea, right.
And join North Korea, right? They also wanted South Korea to look better than North Korea so that they could justify their villainizing of North Korea.
Exactly.
And in doing so, they allow them to get away with things that they did not allow other countries. And he mentions Tanzania in this case because Yoweri Museveni was trying to, not Museveni, Lord have mercy, Nyerere. Lord, two completely different human beings.
But it's all good.
I don't know what the ancestors' intention was in putting that name in my mouth in that moment, but we will find out.
It's
another time. Maybe they wanted us to juxtapose the two. But
Nyerere, the opposite of Nyerere, right?
Yes, Nyerere, who is the opposite of Yoweri Museveni. Nyerere wanted to build an industrialized Tanzania, and he was not allowed to because of the policies of the IMF, the World Bank, and the West. But South Korea is taken away, and they're told, okay, grow. And also they're provided a market in the United States, a fair market for their products. So they end up clearly because the restrictions and the conditionality that has been put on other Africans in the South, other countries in the South, including the ones in Africa,
right?
They grow because that's economics. If you're allowed, you're given the room to build and sell your products at a fair price, you will grow.
Excellent. Okay, now who wants to tackle the issue of food dependency?
Oh, Lord have mercy. I think we all do, Brother
Okay.
Adesoji.
Okay.
All right, Brother Adesoji, why don't you drop some words of wisdom first?
So food.
And tell us why food is important.
Okay, so food is important. Food is important in the sense that Brother Sankara said it. He who feeds you controls you.
Mm-hmm.
Boom.
Look on your plate. That's the first sign of whether you're surrounded by imperialism or not.
And anybody who wants,
Speaking of the
who hasn't
KFCs.
seen, go ahead, sister. You're saying?
Speaking of those buying KFC in Kenya.
That's imperial.
Yes,
that's,
absolutely. Thank
that's
you.
food. That's food imperialism.
Right. So we should post also Thomas Sankara,
Speaks.
The Upright Man.
Yeah.
If anybody hasn't seen that documentary,
They need to say. They
Thomas
need to
Sankara,
say.
The Upright
All
Man.
right.
Please continue.
So yes. So one of the key elements of this the food strategy is these bodies, IMF and World Bank, would say, come in and tell you, you cannot spend on health, you cannot spend on education, and you cannot subsidize your agriculture. And guess who subsidizes their agriculture? The European community operates what is known as the Common Agricultural Policy, which essentially pays farmers not to farm.
Right. Let's think about that. Who would not love for your government to have enough money set aside to pay you not to do something?
Yes.
But here's your check. You still have enough to maintain yourself, maintain your family, go on vacation, save some of it to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. And they do it for a reason, right?
Oh, yes.
But they tell you in Africa to do the exact opposite. Lay it out, brother. Lay it out.
Okay. So the America also, the United States also has the similar type policy in place, which is subsidizing the farmers. They subsidize the farmers so much so that they also then control the price. What do? They will put what they need to put in the markets. Excess will be stored. Anything over said excess will be dumped in the sea. There is no, it's if you off the coast of California is where the dumping mostly happens. So that's why you have schools of fish come over there, because they're basically getting free food. And so how does that impact Africa? Governments are not allowed to subsidize their farmers. And if you don't have the machinery, you don't have the wherewithal, what are you going to end up doing? You're going to end up importing your food. And when you import your food, what else happens? You're not only losing money, by importing the food, your people are starving, and then you're also creating employment on the other side of the world to the detriment of your own people. And again, it goes back to what Sankara said. He who feeds you controls you.
So, brother, I'm looking at this just for one commodity, cotton producers, right? Subsidies for cotton producers.
Yes.
And before the end of the show, we'll come up with more data. This is in the US. The federal government gave direct payments to farmers from 1996 to 2014 and to 2016 for cotton producers of about $5 billion per year. We're talking cotton, right?
Yes.
Not the other industries. Payments were given regardless of what farmers grew and were based on historical production data, right?
Yeah.
Not even what you're producing now. Direct payments. Think about that. And you're telling them in Africa to do the opposite. We are keeping our farmers alive and prosperous while we're telling you to kill your farmers.
Mm.
And we're telling you not to industrialize.
Mm.
Focus on the things you're best producing.
Comparative advantage is called.
Exactly. So let's split it up. You produce agriculture and I'll produce manufacture. And we can trade and benefit. But at the same time, we find out that they're not only producing agriculture, but actually subsidizing it.
As in agriculture.
You know? So it's like a double suicide, actually. You know? Sister, your thoughts on the food dependence?
When it comes to food, let's start with colonialism. That's where food hijacking in Africa starts. Right? Because they come in.
What was established during colonialism, correct?
And when you actually think about it, they are established during colonialism. So they are established for the benefit of colonialists. And when they tell you as a nation, stop producing food for your people. Are you growing cabbages? You're going to be penalized. Are you growing, what else do we
eat?
Kale,
tomatoes, you name it.
Tomatoes, onions. You're going to be penalized. There are policies to penalize you. But what you must do is grow tea, coffee, peanuts, depending on where you are, cocoa, all that for the West, so that we can come
for the colonial power at that time.
So that we can come and get
let's be very specific so listeners know how serious this was. In the French colonies, if you did not grow peanuts, right, on your own farm, and you produce something else, it was actually a crime, right? You'd be prosecuted. And you would be imprisoned and forced to pay a fine as well. Because you dared grow something you could eat. Let's think about that. So you're right. We need to tie. And now you see how there's no difference between what the IMF and World Bank are doing than what the colonial governments were doing. As we said, at some point, formal colonialism just became impracticable and politically incorrect. But there's no difference with this. But continue, sister. When you mentioned peanuts, the French thing just snapped.
I know.
But go ahead.
It's hard to control the emotion with this topic. It really is. This topic is culminating of all other atrocities in Africa. It really is. It really is the motherboard.
The basis foundation.
It controls everything. Yeah. So for me, when I think of tea and I hear of people saying English tea, just that phrase in itself, English tea. Now you're going to tell me the last time that you all went to England and saw plantations that growing tea, so that you can tell me that there actually is such a thing known as English tea.
Or Swiss chocolate.
Or Swiss chocolate. You going to tell me the last time you went to Switzerland and saw some cocoa being grown there.
It's not English. It's not English.
With a brain.
It's not English tea, by the way.
Sit there and say, indeed.
It's called Yorkshire tea.
Yes, my brother from the belly of the beast. And show me an Englishman who grows tea. That would be the day I will say English tea. Otherwise, give me Kenyan tea, Ethiopian tea, Rwandese tea, and give me black tea, not English tea. So anyway,
but go to Whole Foods and you pick the package and you look at the back. You know, the sister's actually making a very serious point. You see, made in Germany, made in the United Kingdom, made in Belgium. Yet they don't produce a single crop of these commodities, ingredients that go into making these. Right, sister?
Yeah. And the rabbit holes that are coming out of this are so many, it's not even funny, because even as you talk about that, and as I mentioned tea, I'm thinking about number one, you're not allowed to produce the food. Number two, you're being oppressed. In those tea plantations is so much crime. There is news coming out of abuse, sexual abuse of the workers. You're paying them less and now you're abusing them sexually.
Yeah, I'm glad you tied that in together.
Control the emotion on this episode is, I mean, many episodes clearly. This is just it's wrong, and we
Yeah,
need to do
but knowledge
something
is
about
power.
it.
Knowledge is
Yes.
power. Our people need to know this so that when you see these, World Bank, IMF officials, in their fancy homes,
Yeah.
fancy automobiles, fancy offices in our African
It's
countries,
your money that's buying them that.
absolutely, blood, sweat, and tears, and our officials, fraternizing with them. But what do we talk about? The Africans who are courageous enough to stand up and say no. Brother Desoji, why don't you talk about Julius Nyerere and Thomas Sankara and the sister
Yes,
as well?
I might even parody a bit of his voice. Julius Nyerere once said, if the Americans cannot have private banks running their economy, why must private banks be running the economy of countries in Africa? Does that make sense? Does that make sense to anybody? Zenawi as well, pushback. He said, listen, I would rather have the World Bank and the IMF, or as some of my friends will call him, the International Mercenary Fund. I would rather have them unhappy than to impoverish my people.
Yes.
Here are people who are just literally fought a war, and they free themselves. Now you want me to take the land off them. How does that make sense? So he said no. Sankara also said no.
Yeah. And
in fact, Sankara lived without aid from the World Bank, the IMF, all the so-called donors for 4 years. And he put his country on the path of development, building railways by hand.
By the people.
Roads by hand, dams by hand.
Empowering women.
Exactly, empowering women while you're doing this. And
land redistribution.
Nationalization and redistribution, so that people could actually then produce food. So much so that someone actually from the World Bank came and said Burkina Faso at the time was food sufficient.
Think about that.
Food sufficient.
And the comment was only 4 years. Given only 4 years.
In 4 years, you're right.
In 4 years. And then you have,
and that's why the sister actually mentioned you and Museveni earlier.
I was coming to him.
Been there 37 years.
There is the goal the ancestors had.
And the country is still food dependent. And one part of the country called Karamoja is now starving.
And Uganda has healthy soil. Uganda has healthy soil
in the country. But that speaks to the entire continent. Yes. The continent spends $35 billion with a B every year in food.
On
Think
food.
about that. Yeah. But go ahead, brother.
So if you try to nationalize land, i.e., like the land being held by the likes of Unilever, or the likes of the land being held by the Boers still in South Africa, or the ones in Namibia,
the Lamea in Kenya,
right? And by the way, for those who are not familiar with the Boers, this is how they're referred to: the Dutch Afrikaner who colonized South Africa. They were referred to as they call themselves the Boers. But go ahead.
Boers, yeah. So you have all of that issue. So again, when you mention $35 billion to bring in food in a land where,
think about that.
When you have
that you could be, but go ahead.
In a land where you literally can flick a seed of corn onto the ground and it will sprout.
Not even that. You could drop the seeds by accident.
Yeah,
and it will grow.
It happens. The birds eat your seeds and they go and it grows.
So I mean, it's laughable. It's laughable, But again,
no. But we have a serious crisis of leadership as well.
Exactly.
That's
why we share this kind of education, because we want our young people to say enough is enough. empowered with this kind of information, they must confront the misrulers and say, why are you subjecting us to these types of atrocities? Now that we know, we're coming to demand that you either change or you go. But go ahead, brother.
So again, I'll just surmise for this. When Urere asked them the question, he said, why is it that Tanzania cannot industrialize? What is special about science and technology that you can't transfer? It's because they know, just like Professor Nicola said, the moment Africa industrializes, and Professor Samir also points to it, the moment Africa does that, the West is basically done.
Right.
And they know it.
And they know it. And that is why that echoes to what you said with Sankara.
Yeah.
At the Organization of African Unity meeting.
Yeah.
Now, of course, superseded by the African Union, AU. At that time, it was the OAU in Addis Ababa in July 1987. He said, let's come together to renounce the debt, the oppressive debt, the debt trap. He said, and we've discussed this on a previous show. If you haven't seen that video, go to YouTube and search Sankara speaking about the debt at the OAU meeting. He speaks in French, but there's an English caption.
Yeah.
He says, if I renounce it alone, as Thomas Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso, I will not be alive to attend next year's OAU meeting. That was July. In October, he was dead.
Yeah.
Not even the following year.
Can I add to something to that, Brother Alimadi?
Yes, of course.
Our brother, Professor Samir Amin, also says something to that effect. He says he was talking, in this case, he gives an example. He was giving advice to the Zambian president, but he says to him, if you want to borrow for yourself and have money in your pocket, the Chinese will be very happy to give this to you because it's nothing to them. But if you want to build your nation, you have to come to the table negotiating. But tied to that is, he says, no one African country can go and make demands to these people by themselves. We have to unite in this effort. If we as Africans come together, united and with a plan and strategy, we have a leverage to bargain with them at that table. But we have to have a plan.
Yep.
Gone should be the days of pocketing. Enriching yourself and your family.
Yeah, but then again,
the same demands. Don't compete against each other.
But then, you see, but then again, the plan has already been written.
Yes, the plan is there.
Do you remember this guy, Cheke Ata Diop?
Yes.
There you go. This is true.
And combine that plan with Nkrumah's Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Put those two together.
We're done. We're good.
The master plan
it's a wrap.
Young people, we want you, and post those books, by the way. Young people, we want you to familiarize yourself with those books, right? Don't let anybody delude you that reading is not cool. Reading is very cool, believe me. It will transform yourself. You'll feel happy about yourself because you know more. You'll be able to engage much more effectively. Because if you're living in an oppressive condition in an African country, you could be mistaken and start thinking maybe it's because you are the one who is inadequate. No, the fault is not yours. Once you understand the elements that are working to keep you in that condition, you can become much more effective because now you know what demands to make. And some of the information we're sharing with you right now. And they're in books. Those two books the brother just lifted. They have it. So we're going to post those titles. But I just found another piece of data here I would like to share with our listeners, viewers, and with my colleagues. In 2021, the U.S. federal government provided farms with $28.5 billion in subsidies or direct farm program payments. Adoseji.
In the United States.
29 billion going to the farmers. And they're telling you in Nigeria, in Kenya,
you can't even
in
live
Uganda,
anymore, Tole.
Don't give them a single shilling or naira
Not even
to
anymore,
support
Tole.
their farming. Think about that. You know what,
I mean,
sister? We go back to what you said in the beginning. You said, Professor Nicholas said we should not see it as evil, but it's hard not to see it as evil.
Given the intent.
When you break it down this way and the intent behind it, it's not done randomly, not by accident, you know?
It's not just economics, it's evil economic strategies.
So I know we are going to get toward the last minutes until we go and look at some of the comments and questions posed. So I would like to.
Yeah.
I would like to.
10 minutes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So comrades, in this critique that we've been going through, there are also some suggested solutions.
Yeah.
So Miramin has some suggestions. Professor Nicholson has some suggestions. So, brother, would you like to handle some of the suggestions by Miramin?
Before you do, Brother Alimadi, let me just remind everyone to support us and help us grow Kumbukeni so that we can be here to provide this information for you. Join our Patreon family at patreon.com/Kumbukeni. The same spelling as the spelling you see on our channel for Kumbukeni. Or you can join us on YouTube and subscribe, please. It's not enough to just join us for the shows. Do hit the subscription button and subscribe at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. And we thank you all for supporting us, and we look forward to providing more information for you and countering the false narrative that the West has perpetrated on Africa for centuries, for too long. Brother Disoji.
Oh, yes. So Professor Nicholas says, first point of call is we need to change the ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Economics is all about ideology.
Mm-hmm.
When you use words like comparative advantage meaning, oh, you're good at producing this, stick to it.
That's your role.
That's your role.
You cannot spread your wings.
You can't come beyond growing granules. Don't even think of building factories.
Mm-mm.
I mean, in fact, why would you need factories?
Don't even dream about it.
Just grow and scrub the earth, put it in a bag and send it to us. We'll send it back to you. So ideologies like that, or another silly one, which is, we're doing what is called fair trade.
Yeah.
What is fair trade?
Or fair to whom?
And the big one too.
No, but then if it's fair, why do you need to call it trade?
Tell it like it is.
No, if it's fair, why do you need to call it
the
trade?
English language?
Why do you need the word fair?
Fair in front of it. Yeah, exactly. So trade.
No, but you make a very good point. All the words that are used for these very nefarious, malevolent practices and organizations, right? You mentioned a few of them, right? NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It sounds so benign. Look at what they did.
It's a treaty
to Libya. Sent it back to the 15th century, right? You talked about the general agreements, tariffs and trade. Look how benign it sounds.
Yeah.
But now we've been discussing what exactly they do. Even the World Bank, it sounds so benign. Like it's so nice. It's for everybody.
Everybody.
Bank.
There's
Now
no
we
such
learned
thing as
that
World Bank, yeah.
They were actually telling Malawi in the 1970s to destroy their food reserves before they could get a loan. Think
Brother
about that.
Alimadi, could you please tell that story?
You're right. That is evil.
Please tell that story. Please tell that story.
Well, the story was that, and obviously, and Professor Nicholas also reminded us of this in his lecture, that in the 1970s, the Malawi finance minister was under a lot of stress. He was stressed because of famine in his country. And obviously, he didn't want to be the scapegoat. So he broke with the pan. And as the professor said, he spilled the beans. He said, well, to tell you the truth, as part of the condition to get a loan from the World Bank, we were told to destroy our food reserves. Just think about that. Think about it. Is this not a crime that should be prosecuted?
And they're
Really?
walking around talking about atrocities, human rights, looking all nice and democracy this, democracy that. Sit down,
Democracy
Mzungu.
this, free market this, neoliberalism this, you know?
Please.
Yeah. So we come back to you, brother. Yes.
So he then says, change the ideology, the thinking, that economics, just like Zenawi said, all of those theories and what have you, is nothing to my people here if I impoverish them. So I'm going to have to say no. And for his saying no, even when he came to the Jubilee program, anybody remember that when debt was being relieved?
Right.
Do you
When
know
was
the
that?
IMF specifically left Ethiopia out of that program for 2 years? It was only when people went on them like, Ethiopia too has the threshold, meets the threshold of what should count as a country needing relief, that the IMF yielded, simply because the way Ethiopia runs their stuff is our ideology first. Again, a question of ideology. There was also an example there that in my research that I found that was very funny. There was a time when Ethiopia bought 2 Boeing airplanes from a country from Boeing in the United States.
Correct.
In order to finance it, they took out a loan, and the loan was taken out from an American bank. So here is the catch-22 situation. The loan came through the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as the World Bank. So the World Bank agreed to the loan. They backed the loan. Now, having backed the loan, you will expect when you attempt to repay the loan, whoever your bank will be happy that at least they can use you as a model for everybody else, that if you run your business this way, you can. To cut a long story short, the loan was taken out for 25 years. Ethiopia Airlines decided they were going to pay back the money in 5 years.
Oh, that's a no-no. How dare you try to pay me early? Explain, brother, why that's a no-no.
Because for them, the longer the loan goes long, the more money they can make. So
Absolutely.
guess what they
More
even said?
interest it earns.
They said, okay, we can allow you pay off one, but you can keep the other one. You can keep servicing. And Ethiopia was like, that doesn't make sense. If we keep one loan going, you continue to pay the same amount of interest as if you took out for the 2 airlines, for the 2 planes. So they cleared the loan. And for that loan, when I mentioned that Jubilee program, Ethiopia came into their crosshairs, so to speak, that this is not a country we can do business with.
No.
Right. Because they're setting a dangerous example.
Precedent, exactly. So at every point that they were due for debt relief, Ethiopia's name was removed. So they will come up for voting. Everybody will see Ethiopia there. But when it comes to actual, debt relief, Ethiopia's name will go missing. So Zenawi is like, what is wrong with it? So Zenawi then called Joe Stiglitz. So Stiglitz was the one that leaned on them for them to put back Ethiopia, and eventually Ethiopia got debt relief. So imagine.
There is no way we cannot call them evil. Immoral practices.
Go ahead, brother.
So imagine if you had a leader that didn't know his chops with regards to economics, that didn't understand the impact of said policies on his people, or as they would say, Professor Nicholas said it, that they will keep a dictator like our amiable friend in Uganda in place, and then they will give him money from time to time,
right,
just so that he can to keep him in power.
No,
And
but I'm
then
glad you said that because, and just a quick interjection here. Patrice Lumumba, was allowed to be in power from June to September 1960, and then overthrown by their puppet Mobutu,
3 months.
violently executed in January 1961. Correct?
Yes.
Think about that. Whereas Mobutu was sustained in power for 37 years.
Oh, don't get me started.
The same thing in Uganda. Museveni has been sustained in power for 37 years. Mobutu, and this example is important to our viewers. In the 1970s, the IMF sent one of its most senior officials to look at the books in the central bank in Zaire. Mobutu had renamed Congo to Zaire, and came back and reported to headquarters, said, don't lend a single dollar. The money has been stolen, will never be repaid. Guess what?
They still kept Mobutu.
got $700 million, which, and sister, you can do the computation, but it might be like $5 billion today in value, right? Even though the IMF's own official is saying it's too corrupt, don't give him money. So that goes back to what Professor Nicholson said, that this kind of assistance is just to support dictatorships that do our bidding.
And it's not as if they didn't know what Mobutu was up to. Listeners and viewers can Google this name, Gbadolite. Gbadolite is a village.
For people.
So it's GB.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat when you're done. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's GBADOLITE, Gbadolite. Just like that. It's a village.
Yep.
In the heart of the African rainforest, heart of Congo.
But it's not quite a village. Could you please go on? Yes.
That was his hometown, correct?
It was his
place.
It was his hometown. But what he did was he built a new Gbadolite just out, literally like maybe a road down. He created an entire town.
City, little town.
He built runways to land Concords because he flown Concords, and he had to get his weekly supply of pink champagne
to serve nobody except himself and his family.
Pink champagne to match.
And this is who the World Bank and IMF is sustaining.
They were giving money to
in Africa. But please continue.
The name of aid.
We'll jump to you, sister.
In the name of aid, and also in the name of those monopolistic buyers. You remember them? So that they can come in and get
raw materials
for next to nothing. And so if you Google that Gbadolite as I speak now, it is overgrown with weeds.
You know what?
It went back to its original.
He went back to as he came out of the rainforest, it went back.
But here's the deal though. Now, by the way, I just did a quick computation. The 700 million.
We're losing you a bit, brother Alimadi.
Can you hear me?
We're losing you. You keep chopping a little bit. So
sorry about that. I said I did a bit of computation. The 700 million they gave Mobutu today would be worth $28 billion.
Listen.
Dollars. But I want to wrap with what you said about Gabolite. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Yeah.
Now that is seen as Mobutu's fantasy and incompetence and idiocy, right?
Yeah.
When the story is told, is Mobutu.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere is the World Bank's role highlighted, or the IMF. They are nowhere to be seen. And there are many examples of these kinds of atrocities committed in Africa, where only the face, right? Mobutu is only the front, gets all the blame. And the true criminals are absolved, the ones who knowingly subsidize this kind of economic atrocity.
No, they just pick up their suitcase and go to the next country.
They go to the next
Yeah.
country. Sister,
In other words, the only reason why Yoweri Museveni is still president of Uganda is because of the IMF, the World Bank, and the United States State Department.
absolutely. Because the US is also the largest shareholder in the World Bank and the IMF,
Mhm.
and no loan can be approved if the US does not
Says
want
no.
it to be
Exactly.
Yeah.
approved.
And the fact that he is invited during the United States African Leadership Summit, Yoweri
Right.
Museveni was invited, shows you that they know
Right.
exactly what
They're doing. Yeah, you're right. That's a good example actually you brought up. It just confirms everything that Nicholson said in terms
Yeah.
of going out of their way to impose a certain type of ruler who serves their interest. Because look at the contradiction here. In 2021, there was one of the many elections he was rigged. Many people believe he was defeated by the young newcomer, Robert Kyagulanyi, aka Bobby Wine.
Mm-hmm.
It was so blatantly rigged that even the State Department, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, put a statement that's still on the website of the State Department saying the elections were neither free nor fair.
No fair.
And
Yeah,
they're going
but-
to impose sanctions on the people who were responsible for rigging the election and for the election violence, where over 100 of the opposition party supporters were killed.
We're still
And
to
yet,
see those
Come
sanctions.
December 2022, he's posing right next to Biden in the White House.
Shaking his hand. And
Listeners,
smiling.
we can't even make this up. We are laying out the facts so that you can piece together how imperialism really works in the 21st century.
Yeah.
But there's another solution that Samir Amin also really suggested. He said we should go beyond the Pan-Africanism of just saying, oh, we are all the same pigmentation.
Mm-hmm.
So no, go beyond that, because that's not enough to liberate us.
Mm-hmm.
That economic, what he calls complementarities,
Yes.
right? He gave the example of Zambia and its copper.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to take that up? Or should I continue?
Oh yes, I will take that. I'll take
Go
that
ahead.
up. He said, why can't you walk on the Eastern Corridor? Zambia, walk with Tanzania, and what do? You could choose. You could have two options, really. You could basically ask the Chinese to come in and take all the copper, and you remain
Which is
in
what is
poverty.
going on now.
Or alternatively, you could create an industry around copper, an integrated industry.
Very good.
Around copper. That's the key word.
Integrated is the key word.
Yes.
Yeah.
But explain what he means by integrated, because he does explain that.
Yes,
So
go
that we're
ahead.
not just throwing words to the audience.
So
Right.
by integrated, it means when you're producing if you extract something, i.e. in this case, we're talking copper,
From
you
Zambia.
could, yes, from Zambia, you could use said copper. It could be feeding into a company that produces spoon. So the copper companies knows that the spoon company at some point will need X amount of copper. Or the guy selling electric pipes that we use for our
Any
heating
product
in the West.
from copper.
Any product that you can get from copper. Who produces that? One company produces it. There is an industry, a transportation company that moves it from said location.
Is making money while
That's
doing
making
so.
money,
And employing people.
employing people, moves it to said industry. The industry has people employed who receive the copper, process the copper, churn the copper out. Whoever wants said copper would also then say, you know what, I have my people ready and willing to beat them into pans, into brass, into what have you.
We have
into-
Juakali in Kenya,
exactly.
Nairobi.
And
where
then,
that's
train carriages, if you want to build train carriages, continue
Integrated.
to integrate this organizations.
In simple terms, Brother Adisoji, quickly, in simple terms, Professor Amin says, the success of one entity equals the success of the other entity.
Exactly.
Correct.
They all thrive together.
Exactly.
My success makes you
your
succeed,
success,
and your success makes somebody else's success.
which
possible.
takes us back to the African saying Ubuntu.
Exactly. That
so,
is actually is the best way to describe it. That's the principle of economics right there.
That is it. So
good economics, not conventional Western economics.
Exactly.
Not predatory economics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not the one with the suitcase.
No.
Yeah. So he is
and another word he uses: inputs become outputs.
Outputs. Yeah.
Your input of copper metal to me becomes my output of copperware that I manufacture.
Exactly.
And that output I make becomes the input in the stores. Right?
Yes.
And then from the store, when the consumers come to buy it, it becomes another output,
Yes. Because just like he said, I don't see any reason why you can't have a train line all the way from Tanzania to Kenya.
Which you already have.
Which they did, but it's not being, it needs to be revived. It needs to be revived.
And then it needs to accomplish what Brother Adisoji is saying.
Yes. And this is one of the asks that they can ask for at the negotiating table with the Chinese. Also, China, you do want copper from us, okay? This is the certain price we're giving it to you, but can you revive this railway track? Can you help us get us?
No,
just
build four. Build four side by side.
Yeah.
And two for goods, and two for people.
In exchange for the resources, not for debt or whatever else you want to call it. In exchange for the resources, we're done. We paid each other.
I mean,
these are the demands that our people have to start making. So when they come with the delegations to sign these deals, I know these rulers want to keep it as opaque as possible. They don't give you the information. What are they even negotiating? No. Come to the parliament buildings. If you need to storm parliament, go in and sleep on the floors. You must get the details. What are we negotiating?
What are
the terms of the agreement? And if they're missing things that are going to uplift our economy, say no.
It's the government's responsibility to put out that information for the Mwananchi to have access. It should really. I saw Prime Minister Mia Mottley did that once, where she had a session public that they could listen to and view. She broke down everything, the economics, the reason why they made the decisions they did, who was selling what, why they chose certain prices. That should happen
Mia
everywhere.
Mottley of Barbados, but Mia Mottley is an outlier. In other words,
the exception to the rule.
The exception to the rule. The rest won't do it. Mia Mottley has a heart. And by the way, people who haven't seen this viral video, go on YouTube and search, Mia Mottley, Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados. She was interviewed by a European journalist, and the first question, the stereotypical question, was the issue of corruption, right? And she schooled the reporter, first of all, on the issue of corruption in Europe and in the United States, number one. Number two, and then explained to her how the countries that are impoverished became impoverished. Yes. Basically walked her through what we've been discussing today in about 2 minutes. And
it's called public shaming, which I'm all here for. Public shaming. They decide to ask you publicly, shame them publicly.
She broke the economics of enslavement, the economics of colonialism, and the contemporary economics of neocolonialism, and how wealth is still being extracted illegally from the so-called impoverished countries to the industrialized, developed countries. So Mia is exceptional. We wish, but here's the key, and I'm glad you brought that up. We need to demand that all our leaders become like her.
Yes.
And that is what we're saying, because those agreements determine whether you live or you don't live. Yes. So that is why we're encouraging you to be proactive. Go to the finance minister's office, bring your entire community, your village, or your community you live in the city, and lay yourself in front of his office until he provides the detail of this agreement that's being negotiated.
And these are times of the internet where they can actually, each department should have a site. Each department in their site should provide at the end of the month or the quarter what they have done, what they're planning to do, how it has benefited the people. It should be there. Kenyans have cell phones. Just about every Kenyan has a cell phone. They should be able to access and read it.
And there are people who understand these things, who are not part of the government, that can offer critique and feedback, so that ultimately whatever we are signing in my name, because after all, it's your country, you know, you're a taxpayer, you're a voter, even if your vote is ignored, you have every right to have your voice heard before those deals are signed. So that's a very good point. Can
we just look at a few of the questions in the chat? I'm looking at one especially. Our sister Karen asked, now how can Africa industrialize without destroying the natural environment and heavily exploiting the resources and people to destruction, as both the so-called West and East have done?
That's a very good question. We actually are at an advantageous position because, number one, we have so much abundant sun. We have abundant sun, abundant water. So we can actually generate healthy energy. And then, of course, we have 60% of the world's deposits of cobalt, which means we can also now transition to electric vehicles, which, of course, are less damaging than fossil fuels vehicles. So that's a good question. That's part of the things we need to put on in our demands. In Uganda, for example, right now, we are leading a major campaign against Total Energies of France, which is in the process of building a almost 1,000 oil pipeline.
That should be stopped,
from Uganda to the coast of Tanzania.
That should be stopped.
Through our protest, we have managed to get 26 insurance companies to withdraw from insuring this pipeline deal.
I mean,
we managed to get about 8 major banks to say they're not going to finance it. So that's one example.
To add to that, Brother Alimadi, because a lot of people keep asking, how can I help? How can I help? If you're listening to this, that's how you can help. If you're in France, you can call out your government for this project.
Okay, very good. Thank you for saying that, actually. Go online, and then also you can go to Twitter and search for on Twitter the hashtag and then stop EACOP, STOP, so stop EACOP, EACOP, and EACOP stands for the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. So if you put hashtag stop EACOP, somebody already put it. We did. Stop EACOP on Twitter. You'll see that campaign and start tweeting, become involved in it. And I think if you put stop EACOP, it will also take you to the website where you can sign a petition. There are a few US banks that have not yet provided an answer whether they will insure or not, or whether they will finance or not. So please sign the petition so we can put enough pressure on them. So that's one example.
Sometimes we make activism so complicated, but it's as simple as something like this, where you're not being asked for your money, you're not being asked to leave your house, go on the computer, your phone, wherever it is that you have access to the internet, do this.
Stop EACOP. All right, so comrades, I don't know if anybody else wanted to respond to that same question.
Yes, I was also going to answer. I was also going to say.
Sorry. Before you say, brother, the last thing we want, first of all, thousands of families have already been kicked out from their homes, from their route.
That
they're building this, right? They've been kicked out. They filed a lawsuit. They found some lawyers in France to represent them. The lawsuit, I understand, was recently kicked out, was tossed out by the court because of some technicalities. I don't know what those technicalities are. In theory, it can be readdressed, but also it takes funding to pay these lawyers to do these type of lawsuits. So that's one of the other things you can also support if you go to Stop EACOP. And then the final point I want to make is we don't want Total to do to Uganda what Shell did to the Ogoni region.
Which is what I was coming to. But go on.
No, it's all yours now.
Go ahead, Brother Adesoji.
I was going to say, prior to making my point, I was going to say, they're still using the old tactic, which is pipeline from wherever it is to the sea.
To my boat, to my ship.
Yeah, to the sea. Yeah. Me. So Before it used to be, if you look at if you go on Google and you enter Nigeria railway map before 1982, you could see the footprints of the colonials. Literally, the railway goes to where the resources are. There is one
right.
There is one from Enugu that comes right to the coast. There is another one from Kano, which is bringing granuts to Lagos. There is another one from. So basically, there were just 4 railway lines.
Yep.
As Brother Rodney said, all roads led to the sea.
To the sea, exactly. I mean, I'm even reading what's his name, Joe Mapare's book, which says, if you want to understand colonialism, just read the history of the ports.
Oh.
Just read the history about ports. You will understand why they were created. It's just to extricate, just to exploit, just to take out. It wasn't as if bringing anything. No, it's just take out things of value, take it out.
But you get to find out also who's involved.
Yeah. So So now the point I was going to make to address Sister Karen's apprehensions with regards to how do we do it without. The thing is, the Yorubas have this saying, which is you don't piss on your own doorstep. So if you know you're producing stuff that is going to make money for your community, you're not going to destroy. You move it as far as possible away from people's location, and you will ensure whatever industry you have is contained within that location. The thing with exploiters is they have no apprehension about doing it like what happened with the Ogonis.
Right.
Just pull out. They've not.
And Conrad, for people that are not familiar with what happened with the Ogoni, just briefly.
Yes, please.
Talk about the destruction to the environment.
Okay, so
where you can actually literally just light. You can't even just a matchstick and pop it. But go ahead.
So in the Ogoni land, which produces over, I'll say at the moment produces over 80% of the oil that comes out of Nigeria. And it's literally it's a peninsula. So literally, for those who come from New York, it's like Rikers Island. It's a small place. Their major major resource is farming and fishing.
Yeah.
They have no business with the oil. But these companies come there, dig their oil, strike oil, put in their pipelines, and the moment they put in their pipelines, they no longer look after said pipelines. So it is just come there, take. And so invariably all these pipes get rusted. And this is the bad part about it. The pipes normally should be buried in the ground. Because if the pipes were buried in the ground, you could at least cover them with cellophane and, cover them as they will cover them in the West. But they're literally sitting just across the river banks. So you know what's going to happen. Rain, it gets rained on, it gets heated, it expands, it starts breaking, and it leaks. So on record, there's been at least 80 spills in just Ogoni land alone. And some of these spills extend for miles.
Goes into the fish they're eating.
Literally now, just like Brother Milton says,
the water.
If you strike a match and just throw it on the water, it will start burning because you're literally burning fuel. You can't fish because they now have to go farther out to go and fish. The farmland no longer produces anything.
This sounds like a crime to me.
Yes, it is.
This is what this sounds like. No, I'm not joking. Like, forget about using the word. I'm like literally saying legal action should be taken against.
No, legal action.
They did go to court.
Yeah, they did go to court.
But before you even expand on what happened in the court, Conrad, because we are running out of time, I don't want us to run out of time without you mentioning the name Ken Saro-Wiwa. Please.
Yeah, I was going to mention it. Which is where I was going. So, one of the victims of pushing back on what the government was doing, especially with Shell, was Ken Saro-Wiwa when he decided his people were no longer going to accept it. In fact, the government at the time, General Sani Abacha, because of a riot that happened, he was held accountable for said riots. Although he did not partake in it, he was said to have contributed. So he was hung. In fact, he not only was he hung, they tried to hang him the first time. He didn't die, but they eventually hang him. Paul, did all sorts of dastardly
executed, despite all
So the
international
victims
intervention.
were punished, but the perpetrators are
And
still
then
walking the earth.
could we share the name on the chat? Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Ken Saro-Wiwa. So
Spell
Ken Saru,
it out.
Ken, I'll spend it. Ken Saro-Wiwa. So, and then for his people, then decided, you know what? As long as we're here,
Okay.
Shell.
So, brother and sister, we had another intervention, perhaps by the World Bank and IMF. The images disappeared for a second, but hopefully the audio continued, because when it happened before, the audio, I understand.
No, it
continued.
did. We're still
excellent.
here. Yeah.
All right, so I see the name. The name has been
be their
posted.
offices
Very
in
good.
New York.
Yeah.
Ken Saro-Wiwa, that's the name.
Okay.
People, please look up that name, and you'll get more details on what Brother Adesoji is speaking about.
Okay, so I'll just end with this on the Ogoni issue. So the people then decided, you know what? If you're not going to clean up your mess, you are not going to get a single drop of oil from here. And so they blockaded the installation, and for years, Shell could not enter the installation until recently, about 2 years ago, when they paid compensation. And even when they paid the said compensation, the people were like, you need to clean up this mess first before we take the money off you. So the cleaning up is going up as we speak.
Thank you, brother, because this is a lesson that people in Uganda dealing with Total Energy or France can learn from. Learn from the Ogoni. So definitely look up what Ken Saro-Wiwa's campaign was able to do. Yeah. So we literally have
still want to eat left. Your tilapia and your Nile perch, you better say no to that pipeline.
Absolutely. So we have 4 minutes left. Sister, closing words. Brother, closing words. And I will also say farewell.
I am with our sister, Karen. I think that we as Africans should sit down and strategize and figure out healthier ways to industrialize and produce and manufacture, because they are there. We just have to put our brains together. And the advantage that we have is we have been watching the West destroy themselves. So we can look at that and learn a lesson as to what not to do. I am not one who is for making money over the well-being of the environment. So if producing oil is going to put us in a place where we are just, no, let's not produce oil. That's me.
I agree with you. Totally. Very well put.
It's simple as that. If we're killing people while producing something, let's not produce that. We will survive. As long as we have healthy food, clean air and water will be good.
Right. And I think that sentiment is building. I would be shocked if Total Energies is able to build this pipeline. But in this world, nothing should shock you.
Exactly.
Nothing should shock you anymore. Go ahead, brother.
Yes, I would like to leave with the words of Walter Rodney, who says, we all know how Europe underdeveloped Africa. And it's important to continue to read further, because just like we did today, what happened in the 80s when the book was released, 74, and in the 80s, 90s, and they're still doing the same thing. We need to up our game, change the ideology, and hopefully we'll win in the end.
Asante Sana. Viewers, please spread the word about Kumbukeni, so that if each one of you come with one additional person to join our conversation next week, we will have double the number of attendees.
Yes.
On that note, I would like to say, as the late Samora Machel used to like saying, "A luta continua, Victoria Asata."
As we hang on to
victory is certain. Go ahead, sister.
As we hang on to that minute, I'm going to show a few of the resources and say again, asanteni for being with us. Join us again as our Patreon family, patreon.com/Kumbukeni. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. Yes, let's do this. Let's break the systems that have been oppressing us, and let's build.
And somebody
new ones.
posted, we don't need to copy the West at all. Let's create our own paradigm, Afrocentric solutions for Africa's challenges. You can't beat that.
That's a good closing word. Thank you, Imagine Alkebulan. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.